Hello and welcome to Coffee with Cafe. I'm Chef Kurt Bachman and I serve as the president of Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Escoffier is proud and honored to partner with Cafe in hosting these Trends presentations, which help fulfill Cafe's mission of linking the food service classroom with the food service industry. Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts is a learning community, and our goal is to help prepare students for exciting and satisfying careers in the culinary and hospitality industries. We do this by providing professional programs which are focused on sustainability, farm-to-table philosophy, and business operations. Students who choose to study with Escoffier are offered an accredited education through the flexibility of 2 residential campuses or online programs. So thank you again for joining us today, and please enjoy this week's presentation.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chef DeNittis. Speak about American lamb. And today we're going to talk about fresh craft sausages featuring American lamb, not usual grind. Now, why would I call it not usual grind? Well, in this instance, we've created a great, affordable, very approachable lesson plan using fresh ground American lamb to make a variety of globally inspired dishes featuring lamb sausages, just simply by starting with ground lamb. You don't need a slew of equipment, a grinder, stuffer, or casings in this instance, when you can just purchase simple, fresh ground American lamb already ground for you. That helps us do a couple of things. It helps keep the handling, or CCPs, to a minimum, critical control points. The less handling, the better, and increased safety and sanitation that we'll have. Realizing there's over 80,000 sheep farms and ranches across the US, connect with your local distributor, or better yet, reach out to the American Landlord. They'll be more than happy to connect you with a farmer or rancher in your state. And realize incorporating fresh ground American lamb supports American lamb family farms and ranches in your state, because there is one in every state across the US to serve your needs. Let's talk a little bit about what fresh sausage is as defined by the USDA, or FSIS, if you will, and a standard of identity. A definition of fresh sausage basically is coarse or finely comminuted meat food product. And then may contain up to 3% of water as the total ingredient. And because of that, they set those standards a long time ago so that the American consumers aren't being charged meat prices for water. Now, water is an important part, not always necessary, but it is often used in sausages to give it a good mouthfeel, texture, and help with retaining some moisture and things along those lines. A couple of the other things that we want to take into consideration is that it's usually seasoned, and oftentimes it needs to be cooked. Anything more than what we'll talk about later, if more than 2% salt, is something for a little bit more advanced. That's going to be for dry curing, and something familiar or popular now known as charcuterie. A lot of the recipes within are about 1 to 1.5%, and that's good for a fresh sausage. We'll talk a little bit about salt a little bit later, and decreasing that for salt-sensitive communities. Ground lamb, what is it? Where does it come from? It can come from any part of the carcass, and typically it's going to have a fat content not exceeding 20%. So 80% lean, 20% fat. If we were making this from, say, a shoulder or a leg cut, we would have 8 pounds of lean meat and about 2 pounds of fat for a 10-pound batch, just to kind of give you a little bit of a ratio, an idea there. With that, once we mix in all our herbs and spices and things along those lines, water can help with mixing the dry spices. And dry spices are typically often used as opposed to fresh, at least in the commercial USDA world. In most scratch kitchens, commercial food service kitchens, oftentimes while dry ingredients are used, realize that dry ingredients are much more concentrated. So you need a little bit less. And typically following a recipe, if you wanted to substitute your recipe that called for dry and you use fresh instead, simply increase the amount by about 2.5 to 3 times. For example, in this, I substituted dry parsley. I actually used celery leaves, which is a member of the parsley family. I'm using a little bit more than what the recipe called for as a dry item. Instead, rather using fresh, I increased it about 2.5 times. So take those things into consideration. And there's a wide array of common flavors: cumin, celery seed, mustard seed, fennel seeds, paprika, a variety of red chili flake peppers, everything from a Turkish Aleppo to a Caribe chili, or things along those lines, to give it its own specific influence found across the globe. So many rich flavors and things along those lines. Let's talk a little bit about forms. And obviously you can see here, I've got some meatballs, and that's different. We've got a couple different sizes there, and talking about reference of how portion sizes are important and such. We also look at a couple different examples here. We'll talk about patties. Now, one thing about patties, I've got some little 1 ounce mini meatballs, if you will. We can turn those into little sliders. A 1 to a 2 ounce slider is wonderful. These here are a 2 ounce style breakfast sausage, uncased. We don't need an intestine or other type of form. This is all hand formed. So we could simply grill these or cook these as is and put it on a plate. However, when we talk about hand forming, some things that we don't have to do is we don't have to hand form each one. What we can do is make all of our little portioned out balls. And as you can see, this here is a very helpful tool in doing that. Quick, you can place it on cheap pans and things along those lines. These here, we'd want to just simply roll out into the oblong shape, so it looks like it's a case sausage. Again, it doesn't need to. Now, obviously, hand patting would take a long time. So what's very common is just simply laying all your items out and then putting a piece of parchment over it like so. And then we take another sheet pan and then press. They're still hand formed, but you're increasing your efficiency and decreasing the amount of labor it takes. Look at how fast we did this. And oftentimes what they'll call that, we can see a significant difference. So we've got this here. You can see how much flatter they are now. We've got some great little slider patties. We got a hoagie style little patty with the oval or oblong ones. What's nice about that is pretty much ready to go. We want to form it around a stick like so. Just take it. Some show it where they kind of press it, so they give it a little look up here like so. And there we have simply skewered like so. Set that off to the side. So we've got our different forms and shapes. Let's talk about how we get to the plate and such, and what makes up a recipe and a formula for all these wonderful different presentations, be they in a ball form, be they in a bulk crumbled cooked form, like on a pizza or flatbread, or a skewer. Talking about recipe formulations. Now, this is a great classroom activity where we get into converting recipes for commercial use. Whether or not you're going to make 1,000 pounds or 500 pounds, going through the process makes a great classroom activity to teach about furthering recipe conversion factors. Those commercial production, we typically have this form, and if you're Excel savvy, you can kind of create a 5 pound, a 10 pound, all the way up to 1,000 or 10,000 pound column. That helps with ease of recipe. What makes the sausage formulation consistent is the percentages. USDA, that's used for when you're applying for labels, a little more advanced stuff, but making a sausage, your average sausage formulation is going to contain about 93 to 97% meat and fat. And again, that's about an 80-20 mean to fat ratio. All your other ingredients, water up to 3%. We can use other liquid ingredients as flavor or aromatics. However, that does not count against the water. We can't, as I said earlier, have more than 3% water charging consumers meat prices for water, basically. And from there, we have our salt, 1 to 2%. Consider for salt-sensitive populations going a little less and maybe supplementing altogether, increasing the use of vinegar. Citrus always helps as a great example as well, too, to decrease the amount of salt in the recipe. And then also there may be a binder if you're doing something like a meatball. These meatballs here do not have any binder, which would be basically like an egg and breadcrumb. Or if you have gluten-free populations, consider substituting breadcrumbs with oats or barley or some other type of grain. Quinoa even would work well as that breadcrumb replacement for gluten-free populations and such. Here's a quick example. And again, in speaking about the classroom or home type recipes calling for tablespoons, teaspoons, and things like that, commercial production, typically you don't want to stand there and count out a tablespoon, 100 tablespoons for one batch. We're going to convert everything into pound measure. Also, another good tool to use would be grams as a unit. Grams tends to be more precise, but again, when we're doing such large batches, the pound and ounce volume works just great. So converting your recipes to the pound unit, it works fine. If you want to take it a little further, include grams and kilograms and things along those lines, you certainly can. Typically, it's about 1 tablespoon roughly of salt per pound of meat roughly, and that comes out to about 12 grams is suggested. You always want to taste a little bit before you get going, things along those lines. So let's talk a little bit about making the sausage and what goes from there. So here I've got my fresh ground lamb. This is a nice amount. This is 1 pound. What I have prepared here is my stainless steel bowl. I've got some ice in there as well to keep it cool. So if you're worried about safety, making 1 pound of fresh American lamb sausage in about 15, 20 minutes, even a half hour, you're still fine within the temperature danger zone and the time temperature length that it can be out there. So, but I like to do this in class. I used to do this in class a lot. Just have a bowl with ice below it. We add in all our ingredients. This is the kofta recipe that's included in the lesson plan. So we've got things like cumin and coriander and cinnamon and cayenne, and all those other things. We've got a little fresh onion. We'll throw in there some cinnamon. Got our cayenne, and the pungency and aromatics in this is just wonderful. A little lime juice. And again, remember, recipes are just guidelines. So really, you can kind of play with it as you see fit. One of the things we're going to do here is I'm going to use my fingers like a just grip and twist. Okay, grip and twist. As you can see there, I'm just going to incorporate that really well. Think of yourself as a Hobart mixing machine, if you will. And we're just going to press that all together and twist and press. And we want to really mix that up really nicely. Oh, the smell is wonderful. It's too bad Zoom doesn't have a smeller function, because this is amazing. So once we have that, we can always use a scale depending on what we want to do. If we want to do a nice entree, let's maybe do like a 4 ounce. There we go, 4.5 ounce. Do 1. 2 4 ounces. Example. So what I've got here is some metal skewers. You can purchase these online or wherever. And typically what they do, this would be nice for entrees. This is great for shared plates. Today, sharing at the table is wonderful. So we just form that around. Some people like to divot their fingers in there, press that really nicely and give it a little shape and such. There. Put this one on there too. Do a big 8 ounce. So shared for 2 person. Get that nice and flat. And typically, after working it, it's easier to chill it first before putting it on the skewer. It's firmer to work with. While working it and such, realize that the friction causes a little bit of heat, so it's going to warm it up and make it a little bit looser. So chilling it up helps tremendously. Another thing, a shape, if you will, would be a quenelle. And that's simply taking 2 spoons, and we're going to make a 3-sided kind of oval, oblong shape. Like so, and that's for more classical presentations and such. As a young cook, I really enjoyed making quenelles. The first couple are kind of awkward to get used to, and just that technique. There we go. Pressing and forming the shape there. Like so. So cook time, we want to cook to an internal temperature of about 160 degrees. If we had an egg product in there, we certainly want to go to about 165 as the suggested cooking internal temperature for safety purposes, of course. An easy way to incorporate lamb into your curriculum, your weekly agenda, or what have you, into your class. And it offers such a significant array of opportunities to talk about not only different species of protein, but also the global cuisine that goes along with it, beyond just the typical rack and loin chop cuts and things like that. Ground American lamb makes sense. It's economical, it's affordable, and you don't need a slew of equipment to incorporate it into your classroom. So the meatballs, what we would do is, and any of these can be baked, grilled, or roasted. Typically, we just take these and put those in the oven to cook them all the way through. And as we can see there, a couple of the different sizes I just put together there, just so you can kind of get a reference. Obviously, the larger ones are going to take a lot longer to cook than those little small guys. As you can see, these here are great for appetizers, 1 bites, or if you put a couple on a plate that makes up an appetizer. We've got a 1/2 ounce, a 0.7 ounce. We've got 4, 3, and 2 ounce versions and such that make great appetizers or entrees. Serve a single meatball is very popular, kind of as a knife and fork opportunity. Great to go with pasta, potatoes, polenta, or whatever you can imagine. Even so much as doing some Asian style or Vietnamese style meatballs, simply with ginger and onion and garlic, cilantro served with a nice broth, pho style or ramen style. It's a great accompaniment. And again, the thing is, you can connect with your realizing there's lamb produced in every state across the U.S. Simply reach out to the Great American Lamb Board website. It's an amazing resource center with a slew of recipes and other useful tools, tips, tricks, wine pairings, all the information you'd ever need to have a successful lamb curriculum in your own classroom. And just for show purposes here, This is still a little undercooked, but something simple and clean and easy. We've got a little bit of a vegetable marinated pickled salad here with some carrots, celery, cauliflower. You can really use whatever is in season too. That's what makes it nice. Even so much as doing some pickled winter squashes, acorn squash, butternut squash, and such. Got a nice piece of flatbread, naan, pita, or pizza dough type things work excellently. Equally as just put a little hummus and a little tzatziki there as well too to round out a nice meal. This is about 8 ounces of ground lamb kofta, and that could be great for one serving as an entree with 8 ounces of meat and everything else on there, or a shared plate. Something like this is great. As you can see, it's a little under, but again, just for show purposes, this is what we have. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully, this will allow you to introduce ground American lamb into the classroom, talk about fresh sausages without needing a whole slew of other equipment. Now, I realize some people may have to leave and such, but I'm going to stay on a little bit longer to answer any questions that people may have. Thanks again. Myself and Lamb Board and the American farmers and ranchers raising American lamb.
Okay. So, good morning, Chef. Greetings from California. Great to see you again. Chef Michael asked me to apologize that he couldn't join us for that. Let's see. So, mixing mixing in, is it possible to overmix?
It can be. Good question. And who's that? There was a question about over mixing. So it can be overmixed to where it gets kind of gummy and things like that. Usually we don't want to get it emulsified. We don't want to heat it up too much either by over mixing it. It may get a little pasty, if you will. One thing, that's a great question I wanted to bring up too in reference to texture. Again, if you have too little fat, where it's say 90-10, it might be a little dry and gritty. But as far as over mixing, certainly can get over mixed and kind of get pasty or stringy. I think just a light mix will be just fine.
Is it possible to fix an overmix?
Is it possible to fix an overmix? That's a good question. Certainly, if you were to basically incorporate some fresh brine that wasn't overmixed and just mix it in, incorporate it nice, kind of fold it in rather than mixing it in would certainly help that out. Obviously, you'd have to adjust for the seasoning as well too in that to fix that if it is overmixed. But oftentimes, overmixing will happen if you're using equipment, paddles, and things like that. Typically hand mixing, and I've done hand mix batches of 100 to 500 pounds, just mixing it on a table by hand. Whereas not using equipment, you'd avoid that overmixing a lot less by doing it by hand.
What are your favorite lamb sausage varieties?
I have to say my personal favorites, obviously Italian, simply paprika, fennel, crushed red pepper is probably one of my favorites. I love this kofta recipe here that's included in the package today. It provides a wonderful variety of fresh flavors. And again, in this instance, rather than using parsley or flat leaf parsley, which is what the recipe called for, I decided to use a little bit of celery leaves, being a member of the parsley family and all, and incorporating a nice neat flavor. And again, that's where sausage making allows for you, the user, to kind of have some fun and create your own with some basic guidelines. Thank you so much again. If there's any more questions, I'll hang out. Otherwise, enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, and hopefully you include and try a little bit of American lamb and support American Lamb family farms and ranches. Thank you, folks.